Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Tom Libelt. Tom Libelt is the guy you call when your online course is not selling. He spends most of his time in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He is the host of the Smart Brand Marketing Show. In the past, Tom has published around 5,000 Kindle books, built a successful SEO business, owned a coffee shop, a retail store, a record label, created a documentary, and released 2 albums with 5 hits on top 10 Polish radio. He likes to say that if you can't sell, then you're not in business. Marketing and sales are the backbone of a company. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I like that doctor in the beginning. I was like, okay, the doctor's got me on the show. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So I know you started out in one country and now you're living in another country and you've done all sorts of things. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your journey and how you got to be doing what you're doing now?
Well, it sort of came out of this dream that when we left Poland when I was about 9 or 10 years old, um, and we came to the Chicago area, that's a big Polish population, um, that everyone wanted to come, make money, and come back to Poland and just live it up, right? That was always the dream, this big Polish dream that everyone had. And for my parents, it didn't really work out because they got put into a place where we didn't have many Polish people around. They got regular jobs. They were working many part-time jobs, had to learn English. So that dream kind of became, very far off. Working part-time jobs when you're starting off in America is just, it's horrible. I never seen them and we had no money. That was, my lesson from that.
Mhm.
And as I kept on, getting older, I started thinking that, like counselors would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's like a very common question. And after looking like at my parents and at the counselor, I'd be like, well, not you. that's what I know for sure. Not you and whatever they're doing, not them. And my parents were always, they didn't really know how America worked. So they thought, just go get a job, in a good corporation and then you'll be fine. So, I got my degrees. I was always selling things, I had a little record shop, like I was back then selling weed, like, whatever, just selling things to make things work. And when I got into the corporations, it was actually worse than working at a small company, because you just became a number and like you were completely expendable. And I don't care how high you are. Like I've seen managers and regional managers get, moved and flipped off. Like everyone's, expendable in those. So I thought, okay, well, this plan sucks, so, but before going back on my own, going back in business, because going from like small hustles when you're younger to actually doing a business, it's not the same thing at all. Like you actually have to unlearn all the hustling mentality before you move into a business. The one thing I thought I'm missing is those sales skills. Like I could sell, but I didn't know how and why it worked, right? So being able to, throw in a basketball in the basket is nice, but not if you only get it done once out of every 50 times, right? Because you don't actually know how to do it. You get those lucky things. It's like in the stock market. Initially, those people who win, they lose it all, right?
Mhm.
So my goal was to go through these big corporations because I figured out how they work. So I kind of knew how we can play off each other and make it a win-win situation, which really became win for me only.
Mhm.
But I would go to a sales company. I would get training as a sales guy. I would go hit the streets or the phones because I did every type of sales possible, inside, outside, retail, like anything. And this was already in New York. Like I moved a couple of times before that. So I would hit some of the worst neighborhoods, the Bronx, Harlem, Brooklyn, like some of the worst areas where you really don't want to be selling.
Mhm.
And after a couple years, maybe 3-4 years of this, I was like, they have that saying, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Well, if you can make it selling on the streets of New York, you can really sell anywhere. And it's true. Um, selling for me now is simple. Like, getting on the phone, having a client, I'm like, you don't even understand how easy it is compared to back then when I'm selling something, one, they don't want, two, I don't believe in, freezing cold, getting hit in the face with doors, which actually happened a couple times. It was brutal out there. So that was like sort of my training process to getting back into a business. Initially, what I did after I was done with all that, and this was very kind of impulsive, which I don't recommend, I bought a coffee shop. I was like, I'm going to get back in business and let's just get a retail location going. So I bought one of those. I don't drink coffee and I don't like coffee. So
buy
even
a
though,
coffee shop.
because it just seemed like something that was like, people like coffee, it's just, I didn't really think of the food spoilage, all the insurance, the unemployment money I'd have to pay, all of this. Like, people don't realize that if you're paying someone $10 or $15 an hour, you have to pay another $10 or $15 on top of that for every hour to the government, right? So if someone likes working for you and it's like, oh, I want to get a raise, I was like, get it from the government. I'm paying more than $30 an hour for you.
Mm-hmm.
But people just don't, and I didn't. So after a couple years of that, I just shut it down and I told myself my first constraint is I will never work in the food business and somewhere where I have to come regularly and lock up the doors, open the doors, and pay Uncle Sam to hire someone.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like, I started setting constraints in my business and everything kind of flowed from that. I started playing around on the internet and I did a couple other businesses. I tried services and, as you get smarter and continue doing things, eventually you find your little path. And then, by staying on it, I got to where I am now.
Which is doing many things and helping other people do online businesses and courses.
Well, I've been doing it long enough and I found a niche which really works for me.
Mm-hmm.
So the online course thing came out of the SEO business. When I was doing SEO, I was in Atlanta at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working for a gym. So I was ranking them for like kickboxing in Atlanta, Muay Thai in Atlanta, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all these different words. And I did really well for them. And after about a year and a half, one of their managers, like, we became friends because I used to go there monthly and hang out with them. And, he was a fighter, professional fighter too.
Mm-hmm.
And he just approached me. He's like, well, I do this training in person at the gym. I don't really want to do in-person training. He didn't mind group training, but the in-person one, I was like, can we move this type of training online? And this was like 7-8 years ago, maybe even more. And back then we had, no tools like now. It wasn't so easy to just put everything and, hook it up and the technical stuff. And I was like, I have no idea. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it took us about 7 months to get the course done. And then he's like, I want you to market this thing. And I was like, why? I thought we just put the course out, right? Like, I do an SEO business. He's like, oh, you've been doing so well at this, you can do that too. Again, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing with the course because it was very different.
Mm-hmm.
But again, sure, let's do it. It's how I start everything. I had a drink in Bangkok with a couple of friends and they said, start a podcast. It'll be great. I was like, dumbest idea I ever had a podcast the next week. Like, this is like how typically things start with me. So from that course, it took about a year and a half to get it really flowing because it was tough in the beginning. It's not like marketing services or regular products. It was very different. And from then, word of mouth and then testimonials. And after a couple of years, I was like, I'm rolling with this because I'm really good. 2, competition is kind of weak.
Mm-hmm.
And 3, just focus on one thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I want to go back to the streets of New York. So what are the 3 most important things you can tell someone who's in sales? What do you need to know or do or say? What is the secret to your success in sales?
In sales? Well, the one thing you need to have, and this is something that you are either born with or you're going to have to develop, is really thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed because I talk with some of my own clients who try selling things over the phone or anything, and I've noticed that people get really I guess, emotional about rejection, or if someone pushes back or says something which, like I would completely ignore and be like, yeah, let's keep moving. Um, but that's the first thing. This like thick skin, and like really don't take anything personal. And even if a sale doesn't go through, like I forget about that within minutes and move on to the next thing. Like I don't dwell on it. But that's a part of having a thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that for me was that I was kind of born just not caring much. But the second one was on the streets of New York. Like what we did, it was a really bad way of selling because it was cold calling, right? This is the worst you can do, because you don't know if people are interested whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
You basically hit on 100 doors every single day, and then one person either felt bad for you and bought, or one actually was interested, right? So it was a numbers game. It was a real numbers game. And after hearing no 990 something times and getting a couple yeses every single week or every 10 days, whichever one, like you just stopped caring. So like, if someone says yes, it's like, is this one out of like how many, like you forget the faces even at some point completely. So that was the first thing. The second thing I learned is go where your audience is. That's what makes online so easy. Instead of going cold calling and hitting doors, like it is so much easier finding your audience online. So much easier. And the third thing is you need to understand where in the sales process you are to make sure that you move people along the process. And this is the reason I'm saying this is because it's the biggest thing I see online that people do wrong. Like even today I was explaining to a client because we were going over his funnel and how to sell the course, but I always like to give that big picture also, right? So he understands like how does this all fit together. And I told him, so first we got to build up the lead magnet, the opt-in. We need something to grab people with. He's like, okay, I have this webinar. Okay, let me watch it. In this webinar I teach, I was like, never teach in a webinar. So first thing, first lesson, the only thing you want to do in a lead magnet for a course, other things it's different. For a course is convince someone that the transformation or outcome you're promising is possible. Okay. You're not teaching them anything, no 7 pillars or 5 secrets. No. The only thing you're doing is convincing them that it's possible to accomplish whatever you are about to teach. Don't teach anything.
Mm-hmm.
The ad, all you're doing is trying to grab someone's attention to then convince them that this outcome is possible. So, he's like, oh, why aren't we selling an ad? I was like, because that's not the part. That's not what we're doing. If you try selling in an ad, it's like a guy coming up to you in the streets of New York trying to sell you a watch or a coat, which happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, I'm going to get a burger. What are you talking about? Right? Like, he's like, yeah, you want to buy this coat? I'm like, no. Like, where are you coming from? I'm trying to get a Subway. So it's the same type of thing if you sell an ad. Then we got to build up the sales page. That's what's going to actually sell the course, right? It's the salesperson, this virtual salesperson. And the email sequence is not building on the lead magnet. It's taking the sales page and breaking it up into different portions. Let me think of it as segments. And you're trying to see which segment will actually pull people in. And then when they see the sales page, it'll reinforce it because it's repeating what's on the sales page. And then everything else is meant to sell the actual course, right? So big picture, right? And any sales process, no matter what you do, and it might be a little different for other things, it'll still have all these steps, like the grabbing,
Mm-hmm.
the attention, the warm up, whether it's transferring of emotion or convincing it's possible, warming the prospect up, objections, showing, like it's all the same thing. And then I find that a lot of people who are not good at sales, they skip these steps or mix them up and have a lot of failures.
Got it. So what's the best way to get in front of your target audience? Is it buying ads? based on who
It,
you
it
target
depends
the
where your
market.
audience is. The first thing you need to figure out is who is your audience. And don't say like men or women from 30 to 50. That's not an audience. That's a population. An audience thing would be like, just had another friend, and he's like, okay, I need to help you get some help with strategy for this course, blah, blah. And I'm like, who are we selling to? What's the outcome? And we figured that it's only directors that run these certain health services. We're not going on after anyone else, right? So when you do any type of targeting, even ads or anything, you can see, hey, attentions of directors that, and if you're the director, you're just like, well, that's me. Right? So you got to be very, very clear on who you're selling to. If it's selling health stuff, you're not going after the whole market. Most of the market doesn't want to get healthy. You're not going to convince anyone with your.
Isn't that the truth? I'm in healthcare, and it's like, I'll tell
Yeah,
people, if you do this, you're
no.
going to feel better. Oh, they don't want to do it.
Yeah, define feel better. Because I feel good sitting on a couch. Define that. What's the value of feeling better? Because you know what my value is? A bag of chips.
Uh-huh.
Right. So that's what I mean by, you got to really define your people. For the health, Mark, it could be like people who are starting workouts, just joined the gym, people who are trying to advance, people who have some kind of a health problem that they're actually going to try to correct this problem. There's segments. There's a certain segment you got to go after. You could be doing really well in senior citizen space because you're trying to help them, one, stay mobile, and two, prevent dementia. Could be a very, very, specific thing that you're trying to do. And a lot of these people are scared because they've seen someone with dementia and they, see what being not mobile is like. You step out of the car and break your hip. So you got to figure this out. And when you do, you notice how easy it is to get in front of these people then. But the main thing that I find course creators say is, well, I don't really know what the thing is and who I'm selling to. I'm like, well, yeah, well, who does? Like I will ask, why did you create this course in the first place? And again, well, nobody asked. I just thought that, it's so these are, difficult things to overcome. If you try getting them after the fact, it's better to come up with these before. Let's see what the solution will be, get the ideal audience, and hopefully test whether they actually want this before we make anything.
Exactly. I mean, would you do that by maybe putting a survey out to see what people want? How do you actually test that?
No. Surveys don't matter. Like anyone that's not paying, that their voice doesn't matter whatsoever. Again, another thing I hate that people do is they'll join a group of course creators, right? It's a course creator joining a group of course creators, creating, let's say, a course on healthcare, and asking these other people, what do you think? Who cares what they think? Nobody cares. They're not your clients. They'll be like, oh yeah, the picture is pretty. Like that's going to help you something. Or creating a free Facebook group and being like, hey, I'm going to give you guys a free version and then see what people who don't pay don't matter. It's not validation. What we tend to do, and this after many, many tries, we found it works the best, is when you come up with an idea, try to create some kind of a live version of your idea, right? So it could be just a boot camp, like maybe 1 weekend, 2-3 hours, and break it up into a few sections so that you can teach and get feedback. Right? So for example, I'm teaching how to, do lead magnets, and then next week I will teach about email sequences, but would the class actually want to learn about email sequences, or what else would everyone want to learn about? And I get feedback immediately, right? So they'll tell me, is this helpful, what they learned? And is it something that they want to see in the next class? And I can actually, on the spot, design a class that works for people, make them happy, get testimonials, feedback, and the next version is going to be much, much better. And usually within 2 or 3 of these boot camps, you have enough to then create an evergreen thing that you know is going to sell, and it's smooth sailing from there.
Beautiful, because they've helped you create it. Actually, the
They
people,
helped you
your
create it. Yeah.
your target market helped you.
Yeah. And they all paid for it.
Mhm.
They all paid for it. And I use that with my employees as well. Like, it's probably unorthodox, but I had my employees write up the employee guidelines and everything else. Like they had their own, my employees wrote their manuals when they can take off sick, who's going to replace them. They did all of that. When they're going to get fired, when they get, so if something happens, now it's not like, oh, boss is like, I didn't write this. You guys did,
Mhm. I think
so
it's
I
brilliant. I think it's brilliant. They can't complain. They wrote it.
all I did is tell them, look, this is a company that's keeping all of us afloat, right? It's making all of us money. So when you design this, think about your livelihood. If you create loopholes, then one person can derail the whole ship and we're all gone. We're all out. So I gave them just, a heads up in the beginning, and then they wrote it all. And it
Mhm.
was actually much, much stricter than I would have done.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And with your company, what is the how many people are staying? Is there a big turnover, or the same people have
we
been
have we
working
have
with
no
you for a long
turnover.
time?
We've had around 5 people with me for 10 years.
Hmm.
And what happened is, in the beginning, when a few people left, they made sure I had a new person to replace them and train them without me asking, before they were gone. It was incredible. Like, one of the managers left and she told me like 3 months in advance, she found 2 people. She trained both, picked which one will stay, and then even then answered questions. And at the end was like, okay, boss, you're good now. And I was like, I actually am.
Uh-huh. That is amazing. Oh, that
Yeah. And that manager, the new one's been with me for, yeah, almost 9.5 years now.
wow. I think the corporations could learn something from that.
They could. So, yeah, because we don't have numbers. We don't have numbers in the company. Like, no one has a number. Everyone's got a name, and we treat everyone as a person. Like, there's no, like, the one thing I hated, and this was at Poland Springs, which is a Nestle-owned company. I remember, I told the manager, I was like, we're just numbers here. Like, you can't get me excited about this. He's like, no, we're not. You are not a number. And 5 minutes later, he gives me a piece of paper with my number on it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but it's a lie. It's, yeah, I mean, I have a number, and I just could call it off, like, 0085 something. I was like, this is me. I'm a number. I'm just a number at this company. He's like, oh, but you're important. I'm a number.
Mhm.
So I really don't like that. There's a place for corporations. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, a small team like mine can't build a car.
Mhm.
It's just, you have place for them, but it doesn't fit my personality.
But in your model, everybody knows what their place is and how they fit in, and how, if they're not there, things don't run.
Yeah, and that's, you have to pick which type of business you want to run. So what I do only works, until a certain amount of people. I want the least people possible working for and with me, but I could grow this because I've had a previous business which was a little bigger, to roughly 90 something people. It would still work in the same, type of formula, but once you pass over the 100 people, it no longer works. That's when you have to change things up, and it unfortunately becomes sort of like, yeah, you are a number, because I can't directly speak to 100 employees, all the time. So it depends what kind of business you want to run. Some of the bigger ones where you need a couple hundred employees, you're going to have middle management, and the second you have middle management, you're making numbers.
Mhm. So talk about growing and scaling and being profitable.
Well, I mean, it's easy. Just make enough money.
Mhm.
Don't have many expenses. I don't know. We never had a problem with this. Like, our margins are around 80%.
So if you want to increase your amount of business, but you have a limited amount of employees to handle that business, um, how do you
Well,
do
not
that? Do you
not
just,
all businesses are scalable.
hmm,
Like, we at the moment have a couple different things. We have smaller businesses which sell a lot, and we just don't do much fulfillment. But our main business is just a high-end boutique. We have a couple people. We only get a couple a couple customers a month, no more than 6, and they all pay pretty well. Because if not, we just don't take them. We'll take someone else that will. And it's just a business I want to run. It's super easy for me.
Exactly. So you're talking more, each customer is worth more money, so you don't have to deal with as many customers.
Yeah, and this was by choice and by experience. So before, when we dealt with more customers for less, they were more problematic. So we have a lot of rules which, you develop after a while. We give no discounts. We have to get paid up front. Like everything that was a problem before, we pretty much put in the rules, and we tell the people that if you don't like it, then go somewhere else. But if you deal with us, you're gonna have a great experience. But it's sort of this setup in the beginning where we show who's running the business. I won't let a client tell me how to run my business and how to do things. Like, I know what I'm good at. I'm going to help you get to what you want to get to, which is sell more courses, and we'll make this profitable. But I run the company, and if you don't like the way I run the company, then go work with someone else. And that solved almost every single problem we had.
Yeah, and people have nothing to complain about. They don't like it, they
Yeah.
can just go somewhere else.
Yeah, but the thing that I see in the industries, especially online, is that people don't give this information up front. And then when things happen, all of a sudden there's a lot of pushback, like, but you didn't say. And then he's like, yeah, but you know what I mean. So like the service provider will kind of try to get you in, take your money, and then later on start coming up with all these things like, oh, we're not delivering, or it's this or that. Where with us, we say everything up front to make, like, and I've trained a couple different service provider on this, is we are trying to push as many of the wrong people away as possible and not get everyone in the company, right? Like, our job, the sales page, everything is to push all the wrong people out before they even get on the phone with me. And when I get on the phone, I'm also looking for anyone that's not the right fit and just tell them that it's not a good fit. We're out. So instead of trying to convince you, I'm actually just really trying to see if you're the right fit. And this is a kind of funny interaction with some of the clients, because like, so the next thing you're going to ask me about the budget. I was like, actually don't care about that yet, because I'm not even sure, not even 10% sure I'm going to work with you yet. Like, so we go through like a different process. And for the right people, it works perfectly, so, but this is what we do, just the way we've kind of established our business. And once you become more confident in what you do in your business, I think for any service agency, it's the best way to go.
Yeah. So, in the past, when you were doing all the selling and you would get, rejection after rejection, and you said
Fun
a lot
days.
of times, you didn't always, one of those people that just didn't care, but there had to be some type of mindset, something you did to be able to stay in the game even when sales weren't happening. Talk about mindset.
The staying in the game. That's a really good question. And it's hard to answer because, a lot of people are in places where they shouldn't be. Right? Like, for me, the corporate world is not a place I would just want to be in. The sales were a tool for me to get me to the next step, right? So if you find any, I guess motivational speeches by any real expert or someone who was really successful, they tell you how hard it was to get there and how long was the path to the overnight success. And I never thought that the path would be short. So when I, set into sales, I was like, this is horrible. I hate the company. I hate the clients. I hate the product. It doesn't get any better than that. But my vision is not working for this company, selling this product, or dealing with these people. My goal is to become a better salesperson so I can leave it all behind.
Mhm.
Right. So in those situations, I knew this was going to be just a very painful stepping stone.
Mhm.
And anytime I just, felt like, yeah, I'm done with this, I would go home, regroup, remember like why I'm doing this, go back and hit the streets. Now, if you're in your own business and this is happening, you got a problem. Because when I wake up, I have no problem selling what I'm doing, talking with my clients, or, I'm perfectly content. There's a saying in the stock market world, don't force the trade, right?
Mhm.
The first thing you do in the stock market is before you buy anything, instead of imagining the profits and how much you're going to make or whatever you're doing, the first thing you need to do is figure out how not to lose money. What's my stop loss? When will I enter the trade? Because the only thing you can do is that beginning part, right? When do I invest the money? That's all you control. Everything past that, you can't. Business is very similar. You can control what type of business you're going to start. You can control who you're going to talk to, what you're going to sell, but you can only control that. You can't really control the outcomes. You can't control how the client's going to be
Mhm.
after you hire him. There's a lot of things you can't control. You can only control that beginning. So I like to think about this: don't force the trade, don't force the business. Just because there's a lot of this business porn going on that everyone should have a startup and be selling, and not everyone should start a business. Not everyone is meant to run the show. It's much harder than you think. I've had a buddy of mine who worked as a pharmacist, and he would kind of ask me questions over the years about running a business, and I'm like, look, it is what it is. I'm not going to. And he eventually got into it. He started creating a product on Amazon and stuff. And he told me, Tom, like, I'm very grateful for how it's working. But if someone told me just how difficult it is day to day starting out, I wouldn't believe it. And I was like, that's why I didn't tell you. I just said, look, it is what it is. If you want to get into a business, you'll know if you're meant for it. But don't force it. Don't have anyone else or the media tell you that you should build a business.
Mhm.
Because it's tough. It's going to be tough. Like, look, you can have a thick skin like me, but I'll tell you this, there were days like 10, 15 years ago that were so hard that I didn't know how I'm going to get to the next day. And I would call like my other friends who were in business ahead of me and be like, I'm pretty much done. And they would say, well, what's the problem? And I would tell them, be like, you know what? Get through it, break that wall. In 1 year, we'll talk about this, and you'll remember that this problem is just business as usual now because you have much bigger problems. And it's true.
Mhm.
The fires I put out every single day now are things that would have broke me back then. But now it's just like, I'll get back to it after lunch. I lose no sleep over it.
Mhm.
And some of them are pretty big. Like if I wrote them down on paper, I'm like, yeah, this is a pretty big problem. But I just don't feel that same, you get a thick skin, you become a little more jaded.
Mhm.
Oh, a client's upset. I was like, yeah, they're always upset. Let me take care of it when, see what happened.
Mhm.
Or there's a problem like my bank. I was out of the country. They sent a letter to one of the apartments in the States and said I have 15 days to show my ID because they have some requirement or they're going to close my bank account. And, when you think about this is your business account.
Mhm.
Like that's a huge, that could be a potentially huge situation, right? Well, for me, I just called them up. I was like, look, you guys do what you got to do, figure this out, and I'm going to figure out what I got to do. At the end, they were able to do it online,
Mhm.
but I came out of it with 3 more business accounts, which I opened up. And now I completely don't care. It was a problem, which, was big,
Mhm.
but by solving it and not really, I didn't lose much sleep over it. I was like, well, it's just another problem. Now I'm completely, I don't rely on any bank. I don't care. If it happens again, I was like, well, up to you. I'm taking out my money. I got 3 other accounts. But this is what happens all the time in our lives in business, right? Like we're going to get hit with things all the time. And then you just got to think like, am I forcing this? Am I forcing this business? Because if I am, maybe I got to step out and work for someone. It could be much easier.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And you got backup plans because of the problem that you had.
Well, if you handle the problem correctly, which some people don't, like sometimes, you'll take still the easy way out. For me, I was like, I'm never ending up in this situation again. So I went overboard. I opened up 3 accounts with 3 different companies, tested every single one of them that everything's working. And only after having all of those choices, now I feel like I'm good. I
Mhm.
completely don't care if one of them closes, opens, goes out of business. I could care less.
Mhm.
Um, but this is with other things too. Like you get a good employee, you replace someone was a problem, and it's your only employee, it's your key employee.
Mhm.
And this happens a lot too. I find companies with these key employees, and I gotta ask, like, who's running the business? Because they can't even answer a couple questions during a sales call without having their key employee around. I'm like, well, why are you even talking to me? Just let me talk to the key employee. They're obviously the ones in charge, right?
Mhm.
But that's me seeing that the business person took the easy way out. They put everything on the shoulders of this one person, and then it's like, well, now they hold the key to your kingdom. If they leave, you're done. And I've seen businesses collapse completely when the key employee leaves. I'm like, well, so but it just depends how you tackle problems. Now you can either really tackle it, or you can just see if I can find some duct tape and
Mhm. So let's say you have someone that comes to you and they're brilliant and they want to put together, a suite of courses, and what they have is valuable, but they can't sell, don't want to sell. How do you help them? Do you tell them to get, a closer to come in, or a remote service, or how would that person actually disseminate and sell the valuable information or courses he has?
well, I want to ask a couple of the kind of big picture questions first. Number one, and let's focus on one thing, because I know most people have a lot of knowledge and they'll be like, oh, I can do no, what's the one thing, what's the most valuable thing that you can put out there? That's focus on one thing first.
Mhm.
What are we selling? What's the outcome? Is it valuable? Can we put a value on it? This transformation, who's the perfect segment for it? Okay, if we got those, then we already know we can connect the audience with the message, with the positioning. Okay, next, because you mentioned closer stuff, well, what kind of business are you trying to run? Do you want a business where you need salespeople, or do you want a business where you can kind of step away and just have someone run it,
Mhm.
or you can check in on it? What kind of business do you want to run? Because we have different things. If you're trying to sell something for $10,000, well, you're going to need a closer. You got to get these people on the phone. If you're okay making less, maybe we can do it with a webinar. Are you okay? Is that the business you want to run? Do you want to do weekly live webinars? No? Okay, well, we got to move it into a different business. Maybe you just want something that's evergreen and it's going to make you $400 per course. You can still make money, but you don't have to be around, you know? Or do you really want to just go into like a very much lower um, pricing model and not even do anything and just go on the marketplace? The marketplace sells for you, you're going to play a numbers game, but you don't have any control, right? So what kind of business do you want to do? You want to be in control? Do you want to be absent? Do you want to be involved? Like everything kind of comes down to that. Like you got to figure out what you want to do before you start selling, because otherwise you're going to just sell yourself into a corner and then, well, I don't like where I am now. And this happens a lot.
Mhm.
Like I started this business and everything's going well and I'm taking all these orders, but I hate what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's fun, from my perspective, sometimes it's fun to sell, but not to fulfill. In
Yeah,
other words,
fulfillment's horrible.
the
Fulfillment is
fulfillment
horrible.
can take a lot of time sometimes, depending on what you're selling. I mean, um, sometimes it's easier to sell, you know, 50, $400 courses but have freedom because they're online, than it is
Yep.
to sell, $3,000 worth of coaching per person per month. And, you're getting that big ticket money or whatever, but it's your time. You're sitting there with the person one on one. There's a
Yeah,
big
and
difference
that's the
between that.
thing, right? That's why I say, what kind of business do you want to run? Because I find that people usually kind of want to go in between. after a while of dealing with clients, they're like, I hate this and I want to go into this other path. And then being in another path, they're usually like, oh, I'm bored. I want to go do it with clients again. And I see people kind of going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing, when you actually try to produce something like that, is you got to figure out what kind of business do you want to run. Like, I'll give you one example. And I told the person this is going to be a horrible idea, but I said, you want to learn your own lesson? We can. So they wanted to sell a course where each of the people who buy the course get a 1-hour coaching call from them. And I said, the whole point of doing an online course is so you don't trade your time for money. That's kind of dumb. But if you want to, great. So within the first launch, we sold 40. And this person had to do 40 calls in the first 2 weeks. Came back and said, do we have to? I'm never doing this again. And I was like, okay, now we're on the same page. Let's move forward with this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was the lesson, they just, I think this is a good value add. I was like, yeah, it is, but is this the type of business you want to be in? I was like, oh, I don't mind doing phone calls. Well, after that 40, very quick, I was like, look, let's try selling 100 next time. See how you like that. Yeah. And so we finished. Yeah, we never had calls after that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that same thing, right? But this person wanted to learn their own lesson. I was like, that's fine. I don't mind at all. We'll talk in 2 weeks after you're done.
Mm-hmm. So talking about just an online course that doesn't include any one-on-one compared to a course that, just like you explained, has even one call of one-on-one, what's the price point difference in those type of courses? Is it a huge difference?
Well, it should be. Like I always say, look, the second you're adding your own one-on-one, like you should overprice that thing as much as you can, because you don't want people taking that option.
Mm-hmm.
It should only be for the few people who really, really want to take that option. It should be at least double or triple of the other course.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do want to give some live interaction in the course and not have it make you go crazy, why don't you just do 1 hour group coaching call per week? You pick the hour. You tell the people how it's going to run. You can either attend or send in questions beforehand. I'm going to go through all the questions. We're going to go live. You can watch the replay here. It's the same thing, but now you can still control what you're doing. And I find these work really well. But again, it all comes down to what kind of business do you want to run? Like if you don't even want to be around for 1 hour a week, well, then maybe once every 2 weeks. And if not, then maybe just don't put that in. But, like come up with that before you launch anything, and you start promising things.
Yeah. So, thank you so much for all this information, and I have learned a lot as a business person. So thank you. And
yeah, you're welcome. It's been a lot of painful moments that got me to this.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to go personal for a moment. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
At this point, I think mostly just knowing that my parents are taken care of. And like the closest people to me. Like that's the main thing. Like knowing that any type of nonsense they call me with, like, oh, my tablet broke or this happened or that happened, I'm just, here's a new one. It's not a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned this lesson pretty quickly. If you have a problem that can be solved by money and you have the money, it's not a problem, right? So, I mean, as long as everyone's healthy, that's the main thing. But it really makes me feel good that, like, some of this is that if you have a I think the internet went out a little bit.
It did. So go ahead and just start again, and I'll cut it.
Yeah. So the only thing I said that it took me a while to convince my parents, because they came from very little, so this was a difficult lesson that I told them, look, if you have a problem that can be solved by money,
Mhm.
Like you actually don't have a problem now.
Right.
You just go to sleep. You're fine. Like, and it's very hard. Like my mom's still, over a little nonsense. I'm like, it is not a problem. It really is not a problem, right? But that's what makes me happy now.
Mhm.
And it's not just my family, it's just my closest, like, not just my parents. But like the people closest to me, I'm like, you just don't have, those are not problems. They're not anymore. Like you have bigger problems.
Mhm.
Like, and usually everything else is like, how do you want to live your life and how is the health?
Mhm.
Because those are the key things which money cannot fortunately solve all the time. But those small things, it makes me feel really good.
Wonderful. And now you're living in Thailand, from Poland to United States to Thailand. Why Thailand? What about that gives you happiness?
Well, so my usual schedule when COVID's not around is I kind of follow the weather. And I will go to the States for about 4 months, go to Europe for 4 months, and then spend the rest in Thailand. And so it's just like, I did a lot of the traveling in the beginning of the business where I would spend like a month to 3 months in different countries. And I think I did like 17 or 18 countries.
Mhm.
And you quickly see that there's diminishing returns of traveling.
Mhm.
Because, once you've been to a couple places in Asia, everything in Asia kind of looks the same. Once you've been to 4 or 5 countries in Europe, they're all kind of pretty much the same. In the US, other than like Florida, which is always a little weird, and a couple places, everything else is the same.
Mhm.
So I just picked the places I liked, and Thailand is one of them. And I just set up shop here. So like when I go to the US, I have an apartment with everything. Here I have an apartment with an office. In Europe, I have something. So I just kind of go back between my places now.
Mhm. It sounds like a dream to me.
It's
Yeah.
not bad at all. Like I'm not complaining, but I also don't think it's anything like amazing because I still live just like everyone else. I wake up and still be like, this is like a great day or a day. Nothing really changed. Like my environment changed, and I get it. Like the place I'm in, people come for vacation. Like right now, I'm in Krabi
Mhm.
because we're in Chiang Mai only like a couple months, then we come down here for the weather. And yeah, we're 5 minutes away from the beach. We have a huge pool. This is like a condo where people come to stay on vacations.
Mhm.
So I do get that. When I look outside, like, yeah, these people, this is like they put their savings to just come here. And for me, it's just like, yeah, I go on the balcony. It's my life.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
That's
I do understand that. Like but it's completely achievable. That's why, I don't put it on a pedestal because what I'm doing is very, very achievable.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for all your wisdom and advice. And I have one last question before we complete. What is your best advice to live an incredible, amazing life?
Get enough sleep.
All right. That
if,
is
you,
so important.
if you don't get that, you can't work out properly and you can't think properly and you got to get enough sleep. That's what I noticed with myself. If I don't get my like 8 hours,
Mhm.
it only goes downhill from there.
I love that. I love that. No one else said that to date. So I love it. And it's so true. All right, Tom. Well, we'll finish with that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
Yep. And we'll connect again with you soon.
Yep, sounds good.